Okay, welcome to the last in our series of webcasts on building a data warehouse with Informix. And this is probably the least technical one, but the most that has to do with the big picture design webcast. And it's on what is an enterprise data warehouse and how do you build that. Another way of looking at it is it's sort of what to do with once you've got all these data marts. How do you pull them together? And so we're going to take a look at a couple of issues and what works really well with an enterprise data warehouse. Start off with, I'm Lester Knutsen with Advanced DataTools. I've been working with Informix since 1983 when it first came out, and have had a really successful career with building very large databases with Informix. So first of all, I want to talk about what does not work. And there are 2 points here. Starting out with the big project almost always doesn't work. And trying to have one single source of all your data in one place also doesn't work. And I'll talk about that in a little bit more. Then I want to talk about what works. And the key to what works is you start with your business questions that you want to answer with the data. You build your data marts. And when you build your data marts, you have reusable dimension tables. And you build cross-data mart summary tables. And that's probably the key to the enterprise, is having these cross-data mart summary tables that summarize data at the right grain so that everybody can see them and use them. This is a quote I found. I sort of did a Google on enterprise data warehouse to see what would come up with. And Kurt's someone I've read quite a bit about in the past. And he says that the enterprise data warehouse is really a myth. He's not seen one truly perfect working enterprise data warehouse, and I agree with him 100%. I've always seen people who are building them, saying they're building them, but they're usually far from done. But the idea that there is a perfect enterprise data warehouse is definitely a myth. There are 2 schools of design. One is the top-down design, which is championed by Bill Inmon. And that focuses on starting with the big picture, breaking it up into subjects, planning and building a very large database that integrates all your systems. And there are a lot of people that try and do that. The second approach is the bottom-up design, which is championed by Ralph Kimball. And this approach basically is the approach I tend to follow. You start with a data mart, and then you build your second data mart, and then you build your third data mart. And voila, suddenly you discover that you have an enterprise data warehouse. Now, it's always a work in progress, but at least while it's in progress, you have these data marts that you can use and get results from. The problem with the top-down approach is that you get a very large project, and the cost can be very high with a large project like that. I just saw a client of mine had a failed project where they had 40 people for a year and a half working on a system and ended up canceling it and got 0 out of it. Whereas we've been building data marts on the side there for years and with 2 or 3 people, and they have 8 or 9 different data marts running now, and they're getting data out of that. The second problem, besides the cost, is oftentimes with the top-down approach is since you start planning 2 years, 3 years out before it gets implemented, by the time 2 or 3 years roll by, everything's changed. And oftentimes I've found these projects, what people are planning to build is 2 years too late. I think that's really between the cost and the inflexibility in planning a top-down approach makes it very difficult to do that successfully. So what we want to take a look at in this webcast is how to go about doing a bottom-up approach. What doesn't work is the big data warehouse in the sky, the central repository for all data. That's sort of like the big project that never gets done. Let's take a look at some other things. A couple of other things, and I want to repeat this from an earlier webcast I did. Data warehouse project is not an IT project. You can't have your IT people running it. It's a business project. It's for business users. It's for them to make better business decisions. There's a reason this is often called business intelligence, because it's all about how do you have your line managers, the people who can make a difference in a company, make better decisions about where to spend money, what products to push, what to go for. And IT support is key, but it's the business users that need to drive the project. This is a quote I had from someone in one of my data warehouse workshops, and he used to spend 15 days a month just cutting and pasting data into a spreadsheet. And data warehouse allowed him to stop doing that and actually use data. And he said, I felt like I gained 15 more days a month because of that. It's also not just a collection of data. This is a problem I see a lot, is a lot of people just sit there and collect data, and they don't analyze it. So you get terabytes of data that's not analyzed and not used. And in one sense, that's wasted data. Now, there's a lot of value in huge amounts of data. I like the phrase, one man's garbage is another man's treasure. There's a lot of valuable information in this data, but you've got to analyze it. You've got to look at it. If you don't, you just have what I call a data warehouse junkyard. It's also not just a reporting system. The problem with reporting systems is they are designed to produce reports about what you know. The key to a data warehouse is what you don't know, and how do you find out what you don't know. And so you want to look at it as much as how can I find out what I don't know and need to know, not just reports on what I know. There's a really good story in the January New Yorker about this that I'd refer folks to, where they talked about the last few years and the housing crisis and who made money and who didn't make money on it. It's actually an article on entrepreneurs. But entrepreneurs, his premise was they're not risk takers. They're really very careful analysts. The reason they are successful is they're able to crunch the numbers and read through the information and make sense of it better than anybody else. And that's the key to really successful entrepreneurs, are those who can understand the data and get insights into their data. It's also just not a dashboard system. This is another thing I see. A lot of people say, well, I just want to put some dashboards in front of my manager and that's it. A dashboard is a great thing for telling you what you can predict might go wrong if it's about to go wrong, but it doesn't tell you what you can't predict might go wrong, and that's where access to the raw data is invaluable. So a dashboard tells you what you know, not what you don't know. So what is a data warehouse? It's got to be fast, it's got to be accurate, it's got to highlight your business problems and needs, and it's meant to analyze data and drill into data. Now, an enterprise data warehouse, to me, there are four things that are key to a successful enterprise data warehouse. One is the business questions that you want to ask of your data. First thing I like to do in going into talk to people about an enterprise data warehouse is say, okay, what do you want to know and what that you don't know right now? And let's figure out how to get that out of your data. Second thing is it's really a collection of data marts. The data marts are the foundation. And the key to making these data marts foundational is to have a set of common reusable dimension tables. I talked about dimension tables in the second talk when I talked about schemas. But building common dimension tables that work across data marts is really key. And then the fourth thing is to have cross-data mart summary tables. And what you'll end up with is data marts with different kinds of data, and the data will be at different grains. So you can't just directly compare data from one data mart to another if they're at different grains. But if you build a cross-data mart summary table, you can take the data from one data mart and compare it to another very successfully and make sensible decisions out of that. So let's take a look at these in more detail. First thing is you want to start with the enterprise business questions. And here it's questions. When you build a data mart, I always start with what's one key business question you want to ask of your data, and that's what you focus on. You'll find all kinds of other things, but you've got to focus on one key business question. For the enterprise, it's got to be a series of questions. And it's really, what do you want to compare? The way you and I make decisions is by comparing things. And so you want to use your enterprise data warehouse to compare information between data marts. How does one area impact another? How does doing something here affect something here? Or if you have a performance data mart that measures output and a cost data mart that measures cost, taking the two together and saying, what's it cost to make this widget? That's the kind of enterprise question you want to ask. But the other thing you want to do is look for the gaps between the areas, because this is where I think some great insight can be found. This is what you don't know about your data that you want to find. So what I like to do, again, is start out with a series of business questions. And this is what makes sure that you have a business goal and focus to your data warehouse. Here's some examples. You know, sales versus inventory, time to build versus an order pipeline, sales versus promotion, which pages have the most clicks and which pages lead to the most long-term customers. A lot of times that's getting into the gray area of what's in the edges. But, you know, I've seen a lot of websites that track page clicks, but what you really want to know is which page click combinations will lead to the most long-term customers. So maybe you can start predicting who in the future might be a long-term customer or a good customer versus who's just going to be a one-time customer. And things like budget versus performance versus cost. One example I've talked about in the past, one of my clients is the Bureau of Land Management. And their goal was to build a data warehouse to improve their business practices. It was a couple of things they wanted to do. One key one was to provide access to all employees. And to me, that's a key part of an enterprise data warehouse. If you just want a few people to look at it, it's not really an enterprise. It's a data mart of some kind, or maybe one or two data marts. An enterprise data mart, one of the key requirements or or attributes or ways of identifying it is that everybody has access to it. Now, that, and I'll talk about this later on, that does have some security implications, but you want to give everybody access to it so they can use it to make decisions. BLM wanted to do that, and they had a vision that included things like vehicle data, customer satisfaction data, performance data, budget data. But instead of trying to build a big system with all of this, they started with one triangle, the budget and fund status. And they basically worked their way around this triangle, this circle, building Data Marts until they had the whole thing done. And it was kind of a surprise when we got the whole thing done. We were sort of like, wow, we didn't even realize we were doing it. Every time we do another Data Mart, they didn't know if they'd have the budget to do the next one. It was built piece by piece, and because it was built piece by piece, they immediately got a payback on each one. On the first Data Mart we built, I always like the story, they figured out that they had been printing these financial reports and sending them out to managers all across the country. And when we built that first Data Mart, they basically turned off printing the financial reports because they could say, now you can go look at this on the web. Well, in 2 years, they recovered the cost of that first Data Mart just in what they saved in printing alone. And that's the kind of thing that you want, is building a Data Mart that gets you good cost recovery, and then building the next one that gets you better cost recovery. So once they had these Data Marts in place, though, they could start looking at things like, where are we on our budget? What have we accomplished versus our goals? What was the performance by activity? And not only could managers do it, but this is where it really became effective, is people out in field offices could go look at this data. And one field office could go look at another field's office data and say, why are they doing better than we are? And offices started to share and learn from each other on what it takes to do things better than they were doing. And that was a real, I think, accomplishment for them, was to see which organizations were doing things the best. This is their timeline. We built, after the initial financial one, we built these other Data Marts. And, everybody in BLM, any BLM employee could go access them. They could go look at them. They could run reports on it. And they could see what was accomplished. So you want to have a picture like that. This is another picture I did for another client that said, I want to build and they didn't even call it a data warehouse, an enterprise data warehouse. They just wanted to build an integrated system where they had performance material, payroll material, customer satisfaction information, and geographic information all in one system where they could compare and look at them across the board. So, start with your business question. The second thing you want to do is you want to build your Data Marts. And as you build your Data Marts, this is actually the last 3 presentations I've done have been all about building Data Marts, so I'm not going to repeat much here. But as you build them, you want to think about how you can link them together. And the key to this is the dimension tables in your Data Mart. What you want to do is be able to have the dimension tables in one Data Mart move and become the dimension tables in another Data Mart. It won't work 100% of the time, but that is your goal. Now, for common dimension tables to work, one of the first rules is they have to be accessible. Users have to be able to read them. I worked with one client that had this big project to build a set of common dimension tables. But then they locked them up in a database, didn't tell anybody about them, and no one had access to them except for the 3 or 4 DBAs who built them. And they came back to me about a year later and said, you know, we've got these common dimensions, why is no one using them? And it was very easy. No one had access, no one knew about them, and the DBAs controlled what data went into those dimensions. So if an org change happened out in the field or new product was introduced, it wasn't automatically put into those common dimension tables. It had to go through this whole data approval process. And that basically made those common dimension tables not very usable. So to me, the key to a common dimension table is it's got to be accessible. You've got to at least have public read privileges on it. And you've got to have controlled methods where any data mart can update and add records. And that is probably the most important thing. If a data mart or a division or a group has a new product in development, it's not, you know, it's not yet in the pipeline, they need to be able to get that into the common dimension tables so that they can use it. Otherwise, they can't use those common dimension tables. The last thing is you need to be able to cross-reference the common dimension tables to specific data mart data. And this is where it takes quite a bit of work with the DBAs sitting down with the users and saying, okay, you call this product code this in this group. In this other group, this product code is called something else. Let's build a cross-reference system in the common dimensions so that we can go from one to another. You don't want to get into saying one's better than the other or everybody should use one or the other. You want to build a cross-reference system so people can use both product codes. And that way, the data can flow through pretty seamlessly. Now, this is different from a master data system. It's sort of like a master data system, but it's different. Master data is when you want to control and have the official data standards. Common dimensions have to be more, a little bit more uncontrolled in that people need to be able to add data real quick. You remember when I talked about loading data, I said one of the keys is you have to, when you're loading data, if you come across a record that, let's say, has a new product code that's not in your product code dimension, be able to add that, because if you don't add that, your data warehouse is going to be missing data. That is very true here with common dimension tables. You need to be able to add it on the fly. So that's why it's not master data. But it does relate to master data. It should have everything that is in your master data system needs to be in the common dimensions. And one way to do it is maybe have a flag that says, yeah, this is a approved master data, but this is a unapproved data element. But we're going to use it anyway. So that is key to making the common dimensions usable. One way to look at what your common dimensions are is to, I call this, do the who, what, when, where, why. How is a bit more difficult. But you want to take a look at, you know, who you're using. Customers are probably the key, but it could be employees, it could be staff. What are you doing? And you want a series of dimension tables on that. Accounting codes, projects, products. Where? That might be your organizational structure. It might be geographic information. And then when? Every data mart, and this is one of the first ones you want to make a common one, is a time dimension. Every data mart has a time dimension or time component. And that can be real interesting to put together. Worked with Department of Agriculture, and one element to time that's very interesting is crop seasons. Every crop has a different season. And so a real time dimension there would have a very interesting setup with crop years. and crop seasons. But that's absolutely needed there. A number of their products and programs are based around crop year because of that. Anyway, these are examples of what common dimensions might be. And you want to look at the who, what, where, when, what, why. Also, you need to think about roll up and roll down when you build your common dimension tables. The whole idea of a dimension table is to build some kind of hierarchy where you can go from a customer and roll it up to a zip code, to a city, to a state. Or you can go from a accounting code at the very low level and roll it up to a higher level, and maybe even roll it up to something that would appear in your GL reports. This is standard dimension table design methodologies. You want to think about how you roll up and roll down your data. And this is really important for cross-Data Mart reporting because the way one Data Mart, let's say one division, and if it had a Data Mart, it might roll things up slightly different from where another Data Mart or division would roll things up. And in your common dimension tables, you need to be able to handle both. This I think is the key, is to have the flexibility to handle both types of roll-up in one table. Now, common dimension tables should not be used or are not good for private information. Things that is sensitive, Social Security numbers, credit cards, because you want this data to be accessible to everybody. Private or sensitive data probably needs to be stored in separate dimension tables that are specific for the Data Mart that needs them. This is really key because otherwise, if you build a common dimension table with something like Social Security numbers in it, then you get into all kinds of issues with PII, privacy, information, and data and rules about that. And so you're much better just leaving them out for your common, leaving them out of your common dimension. Common dimensions should be information that anybody in your organization can see. Metadata that's not standardized across the organization is also not very good for common data. And Data Mart specific data. Every Data Mart will have Data Mart specific data. So you will need separate Data Mart dimension tables for those. Now, the key to an enterprise data warehouse are what I call the cross Data Mart summary tables. And a summary table is where you take your facts in your fact tables and aggregate them some way, pre-calculate them. Primarily, you do that in a Data Mart for performance so that you don't have to calculate them on the fly. By having them in a summary table, they're there and ready to go. But in an enterprise data warehouse, they are key because this is where you can take data from several different Data Marts and summarize it to the same grain. And let's talk about grain for a minute. The grain of a fact table is the level of detail that fact table holds. And you might have a financial system that has every debit, credit that goes through your system. Then the grain of detail for that is your daily, hourly, minute-by-minute debits and credits. You might then have a performance system that only summarizes things at the end of the day. And so the only fact you have in there is the number of widgets produced at the end of the day. In order to take performance data and build a summary table with your finance data, you're going to have to come up with a common grain. And the best way to do it is you've got to pick the grain that they both have. And in that case, since one's at a daily end of day, how many units we produce, and the other is transactions, you need to take the transactions and summarize them up to the end of the day units produced. This is key. If they're not at the same grain, comparing dollars with units or dollars with hours won't work. And you want to think about how you get your fact tables to be of the same grain. Now, a couple of other things about grains. You have transactional grains, you have snapshot grains. Snapshot grain is like your end of day snapshot or your end of month snapshot. The transactional grain has detailed transactions that happen throughout the day. If you have two transactional systems, they may not compute with the same number of transactions within a day. And so there again, it might be better to summarize them in a cross Data Mart summary table at a higher level, like end of day or end of month, to get good averages, good numbers across the board. Another way to think about grain is in the hierarchy of your dimensions. If you have a product code in one Data Mart that's down at the SKU level, a umpteen-digit SKU level, but then in another Data Mart is more at the brand level, which might consolidate several SKU numbers into a brand, you need to find a common grain for those two to be able to compare them. And so again, you want to pick the grain that you can transform them both to and use that grain for both items. Time is another one. If you have hourly transactions with something that captures things at the end of a month, you're going to have to take your hourly transactions and summarize them to the end of the month. The whole point here is summary tables are key to making this work because they're what you're going to focus on with answering your business questions. And to get these summary tables to work, you may have to summarize up to the same grain. Now, you may come back to me and say, well, I want more detail than that. And oftentimes I'll say, your systems don't have more detail. You can only build a data mart or a data warehouse or an enterprise data warehouse with the data you have. And if you want more detail, then you've got to go back to the source systems and make sure they can get you more detail into your data marts. So, how do you go about doing this? Well, you start by building a pilot data warehouse. You go out and get the system, you load it, you go live with it, you train users, you refine. Then you build your second data mart, and that's the start of your enterprise data warehouse. It's really, I think, that simple. An enterprise data warehouse is never done. It's always a work in progress. I like to say the only ones that I've seen that are done are either not used or they are incomplete and abandoned. If it's in use, it's alive, it's kicking, you've got to think about continual releases, continual improvements. If enterprise data warehouse is going to bring in business value, you're going to want to reinvest continually in improving it and building it up. That's basically what an enterprise data warehouse is. Now, I'm going to unmute the lines and take any questions you might have. You can also use the chat box on your screen to ask questions if you have any. So give me a second here, and I am going to unmute everybody. Okay. If you have background noise, you may want to put your phone on mute. Does anybody have any questions? Well, if there are no questions, you guys have made it easy for me today. Be happy to answer any you might have in follow-up emails. Just drop me an email. If you do. A couple of things I want to talk about is we're going to do a second series of monthly webcasts starting next month by Art Kegel, who's one of our principal consultants, on Informix Database performance tuning. So watch this space. Coming sometime in May. We'll probably do it 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Probably toward the end of May, we'll have a series on database performance tuning, and I'm really excited about these. Been working with Art on putting them together. On behalf of Advanced Data Tools, I'd like to thank you all for taking the time to attend the webcast, and please feel free to drop me any questions. One last thing I want to mention is next week is probably the most exciting gathering of Informix users in the world in Kansas City at Overland Park. The IIUG is having their annual conference. Starts on Sunday, and we'll have a booth there, and if you're attending, please drop by and say hello. And you can get more information for this at the IIUG website, iiug.org, and then /conference. And with that, I'd like to say thank you guys for attending the webcast, and hope to see you on our next series on performance tuning with Informix. Thank you.